Today, I'm going to be going over what I personally think are the best 4x4 SUVs for your money that are actually under $6,000. I think that's a pretty good price point. That's why I picked it. If a lot of people are looking to break into the 4x4 market and get something affordable and decently reliable and capable, that's what I'm going to go over. So I'll break it into, I think, three categories that would be best, from the biggest boys, the full size SUVs, to vintage options, something older, maybe 30 years or older. And then finally, we'll finish off with what I think are like the best all rounders. The only criteria that I'm using for this video is that it's got real four-wheel drive, not all-wheel drive. It's actually under $6,000, not what somebody says on YouTube. And to prove that, we'll go through Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist together and make sure we can find some options that are reasonable. So the reason I'm doing this is, even though the market has gone crazy, I want to show you that there still are some good options. And as proof of that, we'll find them together. And I'll even show my current ride later on that fits into that category. And for bonus, I'll add which of these SUVs comes in manual, which is always cool. So let's start with the behemoth category, the full-size SUV. This is the freaking woolly mammoth of cars, the XL double shake with large fries, extra large pizza. Can I get some fries with that? If you drive these big old boys, they probably call you Haas, let's be honest. These are like the least capable off-road, but they do have four-wheel drive, and if you need to, carry around your family and occasionally go off-road, these are probably for you. The first one, and the most obvious one that you've seen a billion of, the most ubiquitous, is the GMT 800 platform. So what that is from 1999 to 2007. It's like the suburban cruisers, right? The Chevy Tahoe, the Suburban, the Yukon, the Escalade. These you can find for all day under $6,000. They're tried, true. And if you don't do any crazy tone, you can get the 1500 version, which came with the 4.8 liter V8 or the 5.3. Those are both pretty legendary engines that will last forever if you take care of them. The Yukon, Denali, and Escalades came with a 6 liter, which is even a better engine, I would say, but gets less good MPG. And not that you really care about that, right? If we're talking about this category, but those had all-wheel drive. So if you count that, it doesn't really. It's not four-wheel drive, but it doesn't. I don't know if you really care about that. If that isn't enough for you, because you need more horsepower and you believe the Constitution firmly states there's no replacement for displacement, there is a 2500 version of these cars, which is offered either with a 6 liter or with an 8.1 liter big block. And if you drive one of these, you're probably not even watching these video. You're towing your 30 horses to the racetrack, or you're on a compound in Alaska, up to God knows what. Another cool option on this platform is the Hummer H2. Now, I don't know if you have the balls to drive this. I don't know if I would. It's certainly a statement, but they're good cars. And the later ones, the H3, that was based off the Colorado, so not the same, not quite as full size, but you could even get those with the manual, which is kind of cool. The main thing to note about any of these cars, especially the 1500 version, is what transmission they're coming with, because that's kind of the weak point of this platform, right? There's what's called the 4L60E. It's pretty good transmission of taking care of, but a lot of times they need to be rebuilt after 100 or 200,000 miles. So they can be kind of hit or miss at this price point, right? They're probably going to be at like the 200,000 mile mark, let's be honest. So I would look for one either that was rebuilt or replaced with the transmission. If you get the bigger 2500 version, you'll have less problems with those. Those came with the 4L80E or the Allison transmission, which is pretty damn bulletproof. Chevys are too small for you. Luckily, we have an option, but we have a better option, a bigger option, because this is America. In 2000, Ford offered the asphalt cracking Ford Excursion. It weighed about 7,000 pounds, and it is still, to this day, the longest SUV ever produced, if you can believe that. You could get these with a V10. You could get these with a 7.3 liter diesel, arguably one of the best engines ever made. You're definitely not going to get that for under 6K. But the ones with the V10 or with the V8 is what I would go for. Those are both really good motors. They were offered in RVs pretty much still to this day. Obviously, it's a little bit of a different engine, but Those engines are out there still running to this day, racking up the miles. There's also the way less legendary 6-liter. I would avoid that unless you know what you're doing. You're a diesel mechanic or something like that, because they have all sorts of problems. The Excursion is a great SUV if the Tahoe is just too small for you and it doesn't cut it for all 8 of your wives, right? Right, they can't fit in. The Excursion offers up to 9 seats, if you can believe that, which is just insane. The only potential point of issue, just like with the Chevys, was the transmission. Right, there's quite a wide range of these engines that have a lot of torque. And so the 4R100 automatic transmission, which came in different variations, just like with the Chevy, I would expect at this point you might be running into some issues. So I would look for one that either has been rebuilt or replaced. Again, if they're taken care of, they can go a long time, but a lot of times they weren't. That fluid wasn't changed or they were overheated, which is really the problem with these transmissions. The only other thing I would really point out is the MPG on these is just going to be friggin' atrocious. It doesn't really matter, which engine you have. Probably this thing weighs over 7,000 pounds. So, I would argue this was released in 2000 and we went to invade Iraq in 2003. I'm sure that's not a coincidence with how much friggin' gas these things guzzle. All right, so the third excellent and probably, in my opinion, the best option here is the Toyota Sequoia. This is like the oatmeal of 4x4 SUVs. They don't exactly have a lot of personality, but they will get you from point A to point B. These are old reliable. I had one of these, a 2-wheel drive version. A 4-wheel drive version is going to be harder to find under 6K. I think you could do it with higher miles. The 4.7-liter V8 offered in this car is another one of the greatest engines ever made by Toyota, which is saying something. They've been known to go 1,000,000 miles. I think if you took care of one, it could go upwards of 3, 4, 500,000 miles. The only thing to note with this is I would look for one that has had the timing belt replaced, as that's a pretty big job. I've done it myself. It took forever. I'm not a mechanic. So unless you want to do that yourself, you could save some money there. But you want to make sure the timing belt and the water pump have been replaced. The starter is really hard to get to. But other than that, as long as you do your maintenance, these will last forever. Fun thing about mine is it had 5 sunglass holders in it, if you can believe it, which is pretty hilarious. So if you can find one with 4-wheel drive, this is probably your best bet. As for MPG, when I had mine, it didn't matter whether I was towing a 4,000-pound car and trailer behind me or I was on the freeway. I was getting about 14 miles to the gallon. So not great MPG. All right, so a couple of honorable mentions, which are still decent options, at least for the Nissan. So Nissan Infiniti offered the Armada or the QX56. These are great trucks. The problem is most of them have been abused, right? And so I'd be really careful. I'd try and find like one that has only had a few owners, has been meticulously maintained. They only have, some smaller issues, like exhaust manifolds cracking. Again, this is kind of dependent on where you live, right? If you live in the Rust Belt, you're going to have a lot of different issues than you would if you're living in, say, Arizona. Another option, which would be kind of fun, but probably improbable, is to buy an E-Series, so a Ford van or Chevy van, and do a 4-wheel drive conversion on it. It's going to be pretty hard to keep that under 6K unless you're really mechanically inclined and you're able to get the parts for it. It's a pretty big job, but it would be pretty cool. So as I've alluded to with all of these cars, if your priority is towing and having a V8 and having MPG under the legal consent age, then these are the cars for you. My 2-wheel drive Sequoia got about under 15 miles to the gallon. And, these all get shit mileage, but can tow great and, can haul a family of up to 6 to even 9 people. One thing to note is on all these cars, 4-wheel drive is not standard, so make sure it actually has it, not that they just tell you. Make sure it has the front 2 drive shafts, or you can look up the Carfax to see if it actually has 4-wheel drive. All right, so let's move on to the next category. These are the vintage cars. If your life is boring and you need something to wrench on, and your desire for a cool older 4x4 is stronger than your current relationship, these are for you. So the first ones are the older Ford Broncos, Chevy Blazers. Those are pretty cool. Another good option is the previous generation GMT 400, which is the years before the ones I was just mentioning of Suburbans and Yukons and Tahoes. Those are all great trucks. You could even get a diesel option, which is pretty decent. And you could get a big block 454, which is like a 7.4 liter engine, or a 350 V8. These are all great options. And you can definitely find these for under 6K. They are older, so they're going to have more problems. That's just something to keep in mind. And then also another cool option is an old Montero or Mitsubishi Raider, I think. Those are pretty cool vintage 4x4s and are going to have some problems for under 6K, if we're being honest.
All right, so now I'm going to cover the final group, which is the best all-rounder SUVs that can kind of do a little bit of everything, right? Maybe a little bit of towing, maybe a little bit of commuting, good off-road, decently reliable, under 6K, and not a total piece of trash. So we're going to start with the most piece of trash ones and work our way to the best ones. Although these are really all good options, it just depends what you want to do. The first one is the Suzuki Samurai. This is a great car, super niche, but at this price point, they're going to be mostly really abused. If you can find one, these are great off-road. You're not going to want to do any long distance, and you're going to need to know how to wrench. But these are really cool little cars. In the same vein are the Jeep Wranglers. These are probably like the most capable, moddable, best off-roaders on this list. The reason they're not toward the top is they suck at commuting. You can't really carry any passengers. So if it's just a dedicated off-road vehicle, these are great, right? You can get them with Jeep's legendary inline 6, the 4-liter, with a 5-speed manual. That's kind of the combo you want. Even the 4-cylinder is pretty good. So they're not at the top of the list, but they are really good. Next one, which is kind of a quirky one, is the Isuzu Trooper. These are great cars. There are 3 generations of them. I would avoid the 3rd gen. Apparently, they had issues with oil burning. The best to get probably would be like a 2nd gen one with a manual transmission. They're really cool, rare cars. Parts are harder to find. Just like the next one, which is a Isuzu Rodeo or a Honda Passport. I think there was some crossover there. But they're pretty cool, unique cars. You don't see them come up that often with 4-wheel drive and with a manual transmission, but they do exist. So if you keep your eyes out, those are pretty cool and usually pretty affordable. A next one, which is also a cool option, is the Montero Sport, the Mitsubishi Montero Sport. I was looking at one of these. You can get them in a manual, and they're essentially Mitsubishi's response to the Land Cruiser. I think it's based off of like in other markets they have like a Mitsubishi truck at the L200. It's based off of that. It's a pretty good car though. They're just, you don't see them that much. They're often abused, but you can definitely get them cheap if you find them, and they're really capable. In that same vein, I mentioned older Monteros. There are a few different, like regular, not Montero Sport. I know it's confusing, but in the vintage section, I mentioned Mitsubishi Monteros. Those are great as well. It's just most of those are not going to be under 6K in any condition worth getting unless you get like a 1st gen. So that's why I put them in the vintage section. Next up, kind of similar to the Passport and Rodeo, is the Nissan Pathfinder and Infiniti QX4. Those are a little bit more upscale, a little bit nicer. They're a little bit less capable than the next ones, but they're great trucks, and you can get them for cheap, decent commuting, right? You can mod them, pretty good reliability, and definitely within budget. All right, so for 3rd place, I might surprise some people here, but I'm going to say this goes to Jeep with 3 different generations of the Grand Cherokees. There was the ZJ, which is like the 1st generation from 1993 to 1998. The WJ, which are pretty decent, and then the WK, which are super capable off-road and kind of slept on. You just need to make sure, like all of these, you know what you're getting into, you know the maintenance history, you know what engine and transmission these have, because the reason why Jeep has such a horrible reputation is they were, I think, making their own transmissions, and they all fucking blow up. So make sure you know what you're getting. I got a ZJ, which is probably the most simple and reliable out of all of these, for like $1,500 with a blown transmission, and I swapped in a manual from a donor car that was like $1,800. All in, I wasn't under 6K, but I made the mistake of buying one that was beat to shit and used as a farm vehicle. You can get ones that are really well taken care of and babied and have really like all the options with nice leather seats. and so on. I would go for that if you want to work on it and manual swap it, because that's kind of like the ultimate vehicle. Like the 4-liter inline six with the manual transmission is pretty unbeatable on the ZJ. With all these generations, they have a bad rap for reliability and because of who the owner might have been, right? A lot of these were just like your mom, ridden hard and put away wet, right? So make sure you know what you're getting into. Out of all these, I think, either the ZJ with a manual transmission, they offered a manual, but it's super rare. If you could find one, that's awesome. If not, you could manual swap it. The WK is probably the best one you could find if you can find it with a Hemi, a 5.7 liter Hemi. It's a great engine. Or they even offered a diesel because Jeep was paired with Mercedes at the time. So it's the same diesel, as I understand it, that goes in the Sprinter, Mercedes Sprinter van. And they also offered, with those engines, locking E differentials. So that makes it probably one of the most like comfy, newest off-road capable cars you can get here. You just have to make sure it has all of those things, right? You can look up forums how to identify those things and make sure that it has that. But those are great. The reason they're number 2 is you got to know what you're doing. You can't just go into this blind. Otherwise, you'll get totally screwed. And including me, I lost money on my Jeep Grand Cherokee. So just be careful on that. But there are lots of forums of people really dedicated to these who love these cars. Number 2, and you might be surprised this isn't in first place, but the reason is, there's just, the market's out of control, right? The number 2 spot goes for the 3rd gen Toyota 4Runner and the XJ Jeep Cherokee. These are both like the most obvious answer. The problem is they are just not in good condition for under 6K. They're kind of turning into unicorns or collector cars, if you will, if you can believe it. But there's a tax on them, and unless you get one from like a family member, these are all just going to be totally roached. You can find 4Runners that have like 250,000 miles, 300,000 miles. If you're okay with that, those are awesome cars, right? And it's a no-brainer to get one of those because they're super capable off-road. They're comfy, right? They're good, pretty much all-around cars. All right, in final place, we have the Nissan Xterra. A lot of people sleep on these. I don't know if they don't think they're cool enough, but this really deserves a number 1 spot for best bang for your buck for under 6K. They're still somewhat reasonably priced. You can get a modern car, modern-ish, right? They've been making the same car for like 20 years without changing it, with a stick shift, with 4-wheel drive. They're reliable, maybe not Toyota reliable, but they should be reliable enough for you, as long as you just take care of them. And 6K should be enough to get you one that's in decent condition. If you can swing it and find one, there's the Pro 4X option, which has like special suspension, locking rear differential. It's almost impossible you'll find that for under 6K, but just putting it out there. Just make sure if you get one with an automatic transmission, you check the coolant and make sure that it doesn't have like a milkshake. Apparently that can happen. The transmission fluid mixes in the radiator or something with the coolant. I don't know. Look it up. Do your own research, right? To make sure you know what you're getting into, like any of these. So yeah, I think it definitely deserves a number 1 spot. All right, bonus round for all you gamblers out there. These are people who want to take a risk on a car. I want to spend 6K, and who knows if the engine's going to blow up. The first one, which is awesome if you can get one in good condition, but really hard to find without 300,000 miles, is a high mileage Land Cruiser 100 or 80 series, the LX470, which is the same thing. It's just Lexus's version. LX450, which is also the same thing as the 80 series, or a GX470, which is a great car as well. I think it's like the Toyota Land Cruiser Prado version or whatever. And then there's also a 4Runner, 3rd or 4th gen 4Runner with either the V8 or just with the 6-cylinder. These are going to be really hard to find in decent condition for under 6K. Where I live in California, you can find them, but it's totally a gamble. These can go, 400,000 or 500,000 miles, but you got to make sure if they have a timing belt, it's been replaced. Hopefully that it's been taken care of by some family who never takes it off road. Just know that if you're willing to take the risk and spend the money and you can find one, they're great cars. It's just you're going to have to spend more than 6K, right? Like the GX470 has Some of them have special suspension that is like air ride. So if that goes bad, you're out a lot of money. Another bonus round option is the VW Touareg. I would say do not buy the first generation of these. They're really cool, right? You can get them with a diesel V10, if you can believe that, with a VR6, which is a good option. They just have a lot of issues, and I would be wary of them. The second gen is really good, but finding one in good condition for under 6K is going to be really tough. Unless you're, of course, a Vag enthusiast. Then I would say go for it. Same thing, Cayenne, the Porsche Cayenne. You can find those for under 6K in California, at least. It's just few and far in between. And, I've seen some with like 400,000 miles, but it means they can last, but you got to have the money to keep maintaining them. So there you go. I know the struggle with budgets. That's why I wanted to come up with this list, including myself. I've been in this situation. I did a lot of research. I'm sure I missed a lot of things. If you guys think there's anything better, let me know. Put it in the comments. Just on a final note, I think I would glorify less what car it is. I know we all put this huge amount of emphasis on like how great Toyota or Lexus is, and they make great vehicles. But at this point, these cars are like 20, 30 plus years old. I would really care more about, do a lot of research on the model that you're looking at. Does it have any fatal flaws? And then spend $25 on the Carfax, right? If you see that there's no maintenance or that it's changed hand 15 times, or if you're in the West Coast and you see that it was, a Rust Belt car, just be aware of all these things, because, that $25 could save you $3,000 on like a transmission or an engine replacement, right? You could even do an oil analysis if you have the money. Take the car, or you can't do it yourself, take the car to a shop, get like a pre-purchase inspection. Believe me, every time I buy a car, I always miss something. So if you can do it, do not skimp on taking the time to make sure it's in good condition. Has it had oil changes, timing belt replacements, transmission, brake, differential fluid, coolant changes? These are all things that need to have been changed at this point because these cars are going up in miles, right? So ask them. And if they don't know, well, that's a red flag. If they don't have receipts, I lost the receipts, that's a red flag. So just know what you're getting into. Do your research. And expect to spend more no matter what. That's what I tell myself. That's what I tell my friends when I'm advising them on what car to buy. Just, you never know what could happen and something could go wrong. And if you don't care about any of that and you just want horsepower and four-wheel drive, buy a Cayenne Turbo. That's really the fuck you kind of car. If you just want like a ticking time bomb, but also want like 400 or 500 horsepower, that's the way to go. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.